survivor, yeah.
There were two sides to the story, I know both, cause I made it to the other side. Didn't survive, just survived, but I survived to sing the song, breathe into the mic, and hip-hop became a living soul. So the music could say, lost been trapped in the black hole. I made it through like a breakthrough, even through the feminine drought. The storms tried to lock me in, but I came out with a pen and paper beat, a slick flow and victory shout, like the streams in the south. Survival of the fittest, only the strong will survive. Those who survive shall be stronger, and the strongest will conquer before it ends, before it's over. The modern conqueror will take over. A renegade, a street saint, a street soldier. Don't say that's how the story goes. In the jungle of my soul, what's my goal? Gain the whole world and keep my soul.
Peace and blessings, family. That was just some introductory music, and that's music I made back in my Christian days. So yeah, good afternoon, a good day, or a good morning, or a good evening, depending on your time zone on this planet. So today we are going to have a very interesting, a very important discussion. Pan Africanism versus camaraderie. What makes one African? Right. So while everybody is still going to be joining in, we'll just basically start, and I'll just start with basically discussing the difference between camaraderie and Pan-Africanism. So camaraderie, being a comrade, anybody can be a comrade. When we think of the Haitian Revolution, we have a case where the leader of the revolution teamed up with the Spanish against the French at one point, and then at another point teamed up with he teamed up with the Spanish against the French, and then at another point teamed up with the French against the Spanish, until the two European groups discovered that the man was playing them, and then they decided to put a trap against him. So a comrade can be anybody. Basically, if I would put a phrase that would define a comrade, is my enemy's enemy is my comrade at the end of the day. So if you have two enemies, you can team up with the one enemy in order to defeat the one enemy, so that you can take care of the other enemy later. That's how camaraderie works. The justice system uses the same thing. When two people are have been arrested for a crime, and in the process of being charged, what the justice system would usually do is to get the one person to turn against his buddies, or the people that he committed the crime with, in order to get immunity. So the justice system uses one of the criminals as a comrade in order to achieve their objective. So camaraderie is something that is a strategy of war. It's a strategy of war. You can apply it at any given point, and camaraderie expires at the end of the day. So when we look at the struggle of African people for the past 500 years, we can actually see that it was mostly driven by camaraderie. And what I mean by that is that people, for example, when you look at in the United States, the Black Panther Party and how they stood in solidarity with the people of Vietnam, or they spoke about standing in solidarity with other oppressed people. So that is camaraderie. As soon as the enemy is eliminated, camaraderie becomes unnecessary, obsolete at the end of the day. So camaraderie does play a role, but if if one person, if this camaraderie is in the illusion that the camaraderie is brotherhood, they might find themselves in a compromising situation. So the difference then, now, okay, I've defined camaraderie. Then what is Pan Africanism? Pan Africanism is basically brotherhood. And brotherhood relates to blood. It relates to, we are not connected by struggle. We are connected by who we are. It's all about, brotherhood is all about self-determination. When you build a community is built out of brotherhood. When you have a group of clans living together in one community, that is due to brotherhood, because these people share the same values, interests, and principles. So they come together, could be mainly for survival, and then eventually for thriving and basically building greatness. And an example of that would be building a kingdom. When we look at, for example, the oldest documented example of someone putting together a community, one big community would be the Sultan or the Pharaoh Nama of the first dynasty of Kemet, who went up and conquered Lower Kemet and joined the two lands together to form one nation under one king. And this nation, when we look throughout history, you do not find two cultures between Lower and Upper Kemet. You find the same culture with very different variations among them. For example, you have the white crown, and you have is it the red crown? Yeah. So you have the two crowns of Upper and Lower, which are actually put together to form one crown. So the formation of a kingdom is not really about, it's mainly about going beyond survival. It's about really building greatness at the end of the day. So brotherhood is really based on us coming together because we share, not because we share a common enemy, but because we share common values, interests, and principles. And most of the time, that is easier when people share a bloodline, because by naturally you and your siblings would have the same values, interests, and principles, because you have a common parent who had those values, interests, and principles. And therefore, when we look at a family structure from just siblings, and then siblings are breaking away, and one moves east, the other moves west, and still carrying on these values, interests, and principles, you tend to see them continuing on opposite ends of the globe. And this is what explains why Africans globally still have what we call a common culture, because many of the aspects of our culture, which are the values, interests, and principles, are identical. And the reason for that is mainly due to common ancestry, and also you can find that due to cultural exchange over the years. But I would say fundamentally that would be due to common ancestry. So the reason why it's important to separate the two, when we look at the struggle against European imperialism over the past 500 years, we see the politicians coming in and preaching Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism, they're preaching it, saying Africa needs to unite. So the issue now, the problem with that is the politicians never told the people what values, interests, and principles they share. The motivation behind the African politicians saying Africans need to unite is because they're saying we suffer the same fate in terms of oppression. We have the common enemy. Oftentimes you would hear people associating Pan-Africanism with a common enemy, and which I find problematic. And we'll come to understand why that is problematic as the time goes. So when we look at the origins of Pan-Africanism, many of my brothers and sisters on the continent, if you were to perform a survey anywhere in public, go to the mall and just ask people about Pan-Africanism, most of us get the whole concept of Pan-Africanism through politics. And obviously then most of us would then think it's a concept that was born within the continent. But many of us do not know that Pan-Africanism was actually birthed by Africans who were not born on the continent, Africans in the Western Hemisphere. Even the term Africa for Africans was coined by an African American named Martin Delany. Yeah, if I'm spelling his surname, I'm pronouncing his surname properly. So, and why I need to make this clear is what there are the two different forces that were driving the fathers of Pan-Africanism and politicians. Yes, at the end of the day, everybody is really in the interest of freeing Africa, but when we follow the scholars, the people that came up with the concept of Pan-Africanism were not politicians; they were scholars. And when we look at scholarship, even when we anyone that studies Sheikh Anta Diop, he will explain to people why Kemet is very important for Africa, because he speaks about how Kemet can be a point of contact for all Africans to form a consciousness of cultural unity. So that is very different to someone talking about they're going to shoot you in the street because you're not written. Recently in the United States, we have a Zulu man that was shot and killed in the United States. So yes, if the police didn't know that he was not ADOS or FDA or FBA or all these different tribal groupings, or whether he's a Shona or a Zulu. And often people would say, hey, look, the enemy does not know that you are from this tribe. Or even the story of Diallo, who was shot also in the United States, a man from West Africa. And the same story that we often hear And a lot of people have come to be exposed to these stories due to the filming of the unfortunate incidences. So that there's a limitation to the whole concept of we need to unite because the enemy cannot tell us apart. They cannot tell if you're Haitian or you were born, you are descendants of the foundational Black Americans, or whether you know what I'm saying. So that can work in terms of camaraderie, but it brings in a lot of limitations in the sense that the common enemy is the drive of the whole movement, and there's a limitation in terms of that. When you get rid of the common enemy, you have no other reason to continue holding hands. And besides that, it brings in a lot of confusion in the sense of people now from one side of the globe, Africans from one side of the globe, are asking, he's saying, well, I don't share a struggle with these people. My struggle and their struggle is not really the same. So why are we, or how does Pan-Africanism relate to me? These people were never enslaved, or these people were enslaved and we were only colonized, whatever, all these things. But Pan-Africanism, it begins first of all with defining what is an African. It starts with self-determination. It goes beyond fighting an enemy. It is what we had before we had an enemy to begin with, or rather, should I say, before Africa was even colonized. Because I'm not going to say before we had an enemy as such, because even when we look at the first dynasty inscriptions of Kemet, we do see one of the oldest palettes is Pharaoh Nama subduing an enemy. Yeah, but the point is, when Africans came together, the oldest kingdoms were formed not to get rid of colonialism. Empires that were built, everything that we celebrate about Africa today, whether it be the Ghana Empire, the Songhai Empire, the Monomotapa Empire, or the Zulu Empire, whatever empire that people are celebrating and highlighting on social media and saying we were great and all that, what we need to be drawing from that should not really be just the feeling of, oh yeah, we were great, you white people are losers because you thought we were losers, but it turns out you were the losers. Yeah, that's fine, we can do that. But when we're done arguing with white people and proving to them that, or to ourselves or to whoever, that we are not what they say we are, at the end of the day, we need to draw from the principles of what is the spirit that was behind the building of these empires why did Pharaoh Nama unite the two lands? Why did the Mwene of Mutapa, Nyatimba Mutota, why did he bring the different clans together to form the one kingdom of Mutapa? And so on and so on. Why did Shaka Zulu, the Emperor Shaka Zulu, why did he unite the different clans together under the one banner of the Zulu nation? So these things, when we can draw from these and understand why, then it is definitely beyond fighting colonialism, but it is more about building. And I'd rather work with something that work with a stone that kills two birds at the same time than having to have two stones. If you deal with camaraderie, you still have to come up with a plan after you've gotten rid of the enemy. But now, if you have Pan-Africanism or brotherhood, that automatically kills the enemy. The drive was never really just killing the enemy, but the drive is building. You still have a purpose. It still has a purpose after the white man is extinct, as some would say, is the future that awaits those people. But so because what I love about that is Pan-Africanism is not motivated by the enemy. We are not driven by the enemy. We are driven by self-determination. And so it brings in the question, who's an African? Because before we can talk about Pan-Africanism, we need to define what is an African. Because contrary to popular belief amongst people that understand the concept or people that call themselves African, many of us, I used to also think that Africans outside of the continent are the ones who would usually not identify as an African. These are just various groups like Hebrew Israelites and people that say they're native and all that and stuff. But I've actually come to realize that there are actually more Africans on the continent that do not identify as African than Africans outside the continent. And what makes it difficult to actually pick that up is that the Africans on the continent that do not identify as African still say I'm African, and I'll explain why. It's got a bit of a camouflage to it. So what happens is if you have 100 Africans on the continent, and you interview them, are you an African? All 100 of them will say yes, I'm an African. And then you go away and you ask maybe 100 Haitians, and then you get maybe 70 say I'm African, and then you interview 100 people from the Africans from the Trinidad, and 80 say I'm African. You come up, with your survey, you'll say 100% of those on the continent actually identify as African, and those from the Trinidad 80%, and those from Haiti 70%. But then you might find that your results will be inaccurate. When I go back and ask those 100 Africans on the continent what makes them African, they'll say because I was born here. Oops. So an African on the Congo, born in the Congo, grandparents, great-great-grandparents born in the Congo, will say I'm an African. But then if you ask them why they're an African, they'll say because I was born here. That person is no different from an African who lives in Brazil, who says I'm not an African, or in the Dominican Republic, who says I'm not an African. They are saying the same thing. The other one is saying I'm an African because I was born on the continent. So, and then when you even take them discussion further with them, they'll even say the descendants of the colonizers that live on the continent, they are also African because they are born here. So what you will find is that, and the reason why I bet on the stats, it's not an actual stats that I've done, of course, but I have interviewed a lot of people around. I think the latest person that I interviewed, not really like an interview, formal interview, just having discussions. I always discuss with people and try and hear where where their mind is at. In Namibia, and this lady, I asked her if she's an African, and she said, yes, I'm an African. And I asked her, I'm like, why? Is it because you're born here, or is there another reason? She's like, yeah, because I was born here. I'm like, okay, so if you were to give birth in the United Kingdom, would your child be African? She said, no, my child would not be African. And then I was like, okay, so you'd be African and the child would be British. And she said, yes. So this is where real dilemma lies in terms of the definition of Pan-Africanism. Because we are talking about, we need Pan-Africanism. Everybody's saying, yes, we need Pan-Africanism, we need to unite. But on what basis are we uniting? That is where, because people, I think I've also been asking, why are we not uniting? If everybody knows all these deep stuff, if we can unite, we can have what's this, group economics, we can have this and that, we just need group economics, we can take the land, and if we unite, then we can defeat the Europeans, and then Africa will be the center of power by default, of course, which is true, because Africa needs nothing from the outside world. And when I say that, I'm not even talking about just minerals, because everybody tends to put the value of Africa in terms of things that we as Africans cannot take credit for. And I've also a bit of a problem with that personally, because if we really, as students of history, what we will find is that we have contributed, as Africa as a continent has contributed more in terms of intellectual property than these minerals under the ground. Because I can tell you one thing. If you were to rewind back to history, and then the Europeans came and said, okay, we want to capture some of your people, take them across, and whatever. And you say, well, please do not take anyone. Just take all the gold, the oil, the minerals, and everything. Just take that. Do not take anybody. Just come and take the stuff and leave. The Western world would not be developed. Because, for goodness sake, what do Europeans, medieval Europeans, or Europeans of the 10th century, what if you were to give them the minerals of Africa, what on earth would they do with them? Because when the Africans that went into Spain in the year 711, they didn't take these minerals with them. They didn't take, let's go take gold and silver across to Spain and then Spain developed. No, that's not what they took. What they took to Spain, to Italy, was Africa's intellectual property, which is what was the driving force of development in Europe. And the biggest the most valuable thing in the ancient world in terms of European travelers, or even when we look at I'm just trying to think of the Spanish king. He was instrumental in developing centers that would get as much knowledge from the Moors as possible in order to develop Africa and even build centers of learning. Alfonso, I think it's Alfonso the 10th, if I'm not mistaken, but it is Alfonso. I'm not sure if it's the 10th is the one that actually started the one that actually started the project, but he was instrumental in that, and Europe developed, and it had nothing to do with all these gold and silver and cobalt and whatever that we always highlighting, and even these intellectuals that when they present on the so-called world platforms and telling Europe about why Africa is valuable is because of our gold and silver and oil. And I don't like bragging about things that we did not contribute in creating. We didn't create the oils, and we just happened to be born here. We're the original man. I can't brag about that. We had nothing to do with that. We are just chosen by the Creator to be the first people. So it's not something I want to brag about. So, but it's always that part that's missing. So when we talk about Pan-Africanism and the identity of who we are, it boils down to, because the biggest export out of Africa is not even the minerals, it's actually African culture. Anybody that has looked into the stuff of Freemasonry and all that, it's all African culture. So now we are in the 21st century right now. We are standing in the dilemma of this self-determination as Africans. The reason why we have it as a dilemma is because Africans generally, even until today, it's not even just ancient times, Africans generally do not identify as African. We identify mostly with our clans, or basically our nations. If you come from a nation, now some Africans come from nations, some come from a group of clans. I don't like the word tribe associated with Europeans. So that has been the consciousness. And the formation of kingdoms was all about removing people from the consciousness of clans into a more unified identity. Because if we look at Mutapa, Nyatsima Mutota, when he first negotiated with the clan leaders, the chiefs, and said, look, we need to form a unified state, and many of them agreed, and the ones that resisted, he said, okay, let's take it outside, or you can step away, but this whole area, this is how we're going to do it. And then the ones that said, okay, let's take it outside, they took it outside, but they butts kicked, and then they decided either to join the movement or move to another region. And that is something which we can equate to Pan-Africanism today, except Pan-Africanism would then be on a larger scale, because back then, Mutapa ran from around Zambia down to the northern parts of South Africa. So it was quite a vast kingdom. So when we look at that, we already have the model or the blueprint of Pan-Africanism from our ancestors, except that it was not formed from north or from Cape to Cairo in that sense. But the model is already there, and they've already, even though they did not do it from Cape to Cairo, they've done something that we have nothing to compare with as a generation. Because for the past 500 years, we've really been focusing on camaraderie. And it's very easy to focus on camaraderie. Hence, camaraderie also it puts Africans in a position of being used. With the example of our political leaders bringing us this concept, because anybody that knows me knows I'm not a big fan of politicians in general, and black politicians specifically, for obvious reasons, because they are our next of kin, and they stand as objects of illusion for our people, because our people really see them as the solution and champions of change. But anybody that understands the basics of the system is that the system is the system that we live in, the Western system that we exist in. It works from a system of follow the money, and you will see where the direction. You follow the money backwards, and you'll see where the movement is taking you. Because when you follow the money backwards, you find out, oh, this is who our so-called political leaders, this is who they owe money to, or this is who gave them money, who they owe favors to. So you're not delusioned by what they're telling you that we are going to take the land back. So they stand there in our parliament and they sing these songs. Unfortunately, I can't sing, but I love singing, so I'm not gonna sing the song, So they would stand there and sing songs like, Tina Sizwe, we as the nation, we are Sikalela Izwe lethu, we are mourning for our land. And I even remember when in Parliament, the ANC and the EFF sang in solidarity. I mean, as an African, when you hear that song and it's sung in unison, you just feel a vibration of some sort in your soul. So these kind of things mislead our people, because if anybody really is real about the reality, they know that our political leaders do not have the power to take any land. And I think South Africans, as an example, would be more delusioned in the sense that we've never experienced a coup. Because a coup will teach you that you can change a constitution, write whatever on a piece of paper. When there are basically in a democracy view in South Africa, if a president has won, it's final. Yeah, you won, fair and square. There's no back and forth. But in many other parts of the continent, people know that, yeah, you won, and so you're the president, because the votes were counted and you had the majority. But you go to other countries, they know that doesn't mean anything. That's just a piece of paper, because an army can come through and say, please get up, take your things. You have 15 minutes, pack your things and leave. It's called a coup. So a coup is what would teach people that empires are not taken by a stroke of a pen. You need an army. And our political leaders do not have that power. They do not. Hence, Americans can tell them what to do. Joe Biden says, hey, do 1, 2, 3, look the other way, or stand up, sit down, they have to do that. It's just basics. Even Joe Biden himself gets instructions from the ones that run the United States. And so at the end of the day, every government is captured. The word state capture was a big thing when one of the advocates was doing an investigation on the previous president, and she mentioned that word. But little did people know that it's not nothing unique. Every state is captured, except, of course, for states like the United Arab Emirates, which is a kingdom. So the king, the sheikh runs the place. So he's not captured. He is the king. So it's very different to your African kings like Umswati. So the question then is, what is an African? What makes an African? And I'd just like to then give my perspective before we open the floor for the wisdom from the floor. I would just like to give my reference from a book, Muntu wa Zambi. This book is by Dr. Chilimalema Mukenge of the Congo, from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And really, what he's talking about in this book, it relates to every African culture, if you can put it like that. So, in African culture, there's a definition of what you call a human. And in the introduction, which is also discussed in the first chapter of the book, he discusses 12 elements or 12 characteristics that define umuntu, or a human being. And the first one obviously would then relate to almost everybody on the planet: spiritual being in a physical body. Number 2, being a moving body full of vitality. And number 3, a speech master gifted in expressing ideas in varied types of articulate speech. So that still applies to everybody. A creative mind, possessing faculties of insight, discernment, judgment, fostering personal behavior, adjustment to some shared community standards. Okay, that one, the number 4, creative mind, that can be debatable. Maybe it's not every group of people on the planet, because many of us do not hold the view that Europeans have a creative mind. But a firm believer in God's eternal existence and omnipotence, in divine creation and in divine providence. Now that would not apply to all people. There are, as Africans, it still applies, because at the end of the day, there is no such thing as an atheist in Africa. Yeah, you can say, but I am an atheist. Yes, you are. But in Africa, there is no such thing as a individualism. You can be an atheist. Obviously, you get that from somewhere else as an African. Hence, you even talk about me. But there's no African person that can say my people are atheists. There's no one. You can only talk about yourself, because that is a culture you inherited from somewhere else, where you speak about me, I am. You know, in Africa, we say we are. And even there's the difference between how Europeans adopted the zodiac from our ancestors, but we as Africans, your characteristics, you might read the horoscopes all day and talk about you're a Libra or you're a Scorpio, but our ancestors didn't talk about those things. They spoke about horoscopes of a family. When you say you're a Ngwenya, you come from a crocodile totem. That is your horoscope. It speaks of your spiritual characteristics as a people. It's never about my characteristics as an individual. That is not that important. I'm not saying it's there is no what's this? We're not saying there is no sense of self as an individual. That's not what we're saying. Number 6, a fervent devotee of the spirits, notably God, divinities, ancestors, and natural spirits. And number 8, a family kinship community builder through marriage, procreation, socialization of children into adult roles, tracing biological links to common ancestors, participating in collective sacred rituals, blood pacts, or kinship-based community politics. It comes number 9. Okay, before I go to number 9, when we read number 8, a family kinship community builder through marriage, procreation, socialization of children into adult roles. I remember listening to one scholar from South Africa where he was discussing how amongst the Basotho people, when you give birth to a child, the child does not belong to you. The child belongs to the community, and which is also something which is not just amongst the Basotho, it's something common amongst Africans. That's why in Africa we never had orphans, because when the two parents pass on, the child is still raised. You know, the cliche, or I wouldn't call it a cliche. My apologies. The proverb. It takes a village to raise a child. I was quite fortunate to experience it in my lifetime. It's something which is dead in 2021. When I was growing up in Johannesburg, I remember that every person that was an elder, older than you, was like a parent. So if you're walking home from school, they can stop you and send you the opposite direction to go, and maybe send you to go buy groceries. You can't say no. Because that's like your mother sending you to the shops, whether you know the person or not, you know. And I was fortunate because my pops was a pastor. So when the guys would send me to buy alcohol and cigarettes, I would say, my dad doesn't allow it, which was true. So I was like, you're off the hook. I ain't gotta walk to the shops in this heat. So, and if you misbehave, any adult could pull out a belt. There was no stranger, no such thing as a stranger. They would pull out a belt and whip you behind. And if you were lost, we didn't have cell phones then, you were not lost. So there's someone out there to take care of you. We didn't have to worry about being kidnapped and human trafficked and all that. And really, growing up, we even had the ancient concept of a traveler. I even suspect that the concept of a guest house that you find as a commercial business was basically copied from our cultural concepts. When you built a house in the older times, you had to have a house for the guests, and a guest was not necessarily someone that was related to you. A traveler, during their travel, and while they traveling, the sun sets upon them. They were not homeless. They could go into the village and ask for a place to stay, and they would give them food, everything, and in the morning they'd get up and go and pay nothing for it. So that's because there was no, this is mine, this is yours. It was and this is not very old. I've seen it with my own eyes while growing up. I mean, if you bunk school and you're walking on the street and then you see a very tall person, because when you are 6 years old, everybody's tall, you would have to hide because that person would pull you with a belt and whip you, send you back to school. And then people got educated, quote unquote, educated. I've always there's a sister here on Twitter that I usually communicate with. She's from the United States, so we always talk about the similarities in the experiences from the other side, especially South Africa. And I find that South Africa is it's like a place where they dump American culture. So whatever happens in the States, then they dump it here. So, for example, I don't want to go too deep into it. I'll just use this specific example. Corporal punishment was banned in the States whenever. And then in 1994, it was banned in South Africa. And yeah, a lot of people were like, yeah, we are now civilized. No more whipping of children. But no one talks about the reality of the deterioration of our communities. We no longer have a community. The safest place in this country in the 1980s was in the township, or so-called the hood or the projects. And the reason for that is not because we had police, it's because the community was the police. You could not do anything in the community and get away with it. The community would perform some community justice. They would not call the police on you. You'd actually pray they would call the police, or you'd actually pray the police show up to stop the mob justice. But yeah, but that really helped in we respected our elders. You'd never hear of any such incident of a child beating up a teacher, which is something very common today. And when I was in school, if I was in primary school and I said to a girl, I'm gonna whoop you, I'm gonna slap you, or I wanna slap her, and she'd call the teacher, like, sir, he wants to hit me, and then he'd come on, and then obviously because now I'm scared of him, I can't continue slapping her. So now imagine your daughter there in school, and this boy wants to slap her, and she says, I'll tell the teacher. He slaps the teacher. Who's gonna protect your daughter there in school? So, but a lot of people have been celebrating this Western culture as progression, not understanding that a lot of it is not progression. Obviously, there's a lot of miseducation, and people look at corporal punishment and they look at the abuse of corporal punishment and they cluster it all together. Yeah, but the discussion is not really corporal punishment, because I know it's for some reason, it's a controversial discussion. But I was just giving an example that our community in the 80s was more advanced than today, with people that earn more money, more educated, and so on and so on, for obvious reasons. So now I close the page. I need to go back to the page. I was busy discussing number 8 and forgot that I was actually reading here. So while I'm finding this page, that the concept of community in Africa is something very deep. If I, for example, look at the Tsonga culture, which you draw from, I'm using it as a point of reference, you draw similarities throughout other cultures as well. So in the Tsonga culture, when, English is very limited in actually breaking down African concepts, but yeah, I'll do my best. So when you refer to an elder, you never ever address an elder in singular. That's disrespectful. You don't say, because in English, you is you, there's you singular and you in plural. It's the same word. But in our culture, it's not the same word. It's you in singular is wena, and you in plural is mwina. If there's two people, you say mwina. Or if you greet in Tsonga, you say to one person kunjani, and to two people minjani. But now, when you address an elder, you never use the singular words. You always speak in plural, like you're talking to two people. And that might sound weird to some people, but That was then explained as a sign of respect. That's all we knew growing up. But then, when I really digest and chew upon the concept, I find that there's more to it than just, you just being respectful. I find that the, and I'll explain how I even got there. When you are talking to your parent is your the physical contact to the ancestors. So your father, your mother is the utmost physical contact to the ancestors that you do not see. And now, how I came up with it, how I actually came to this conclusion is that when I look at the Tsonga culture as well, is that when you refer to your elder sibling, you never refer to them by their first name. You have to say Buti, and then they name Buti's brother, and then you say Sesi, so and so. You put their first name, and you also refer to them in plural. And the reason is that your elderly sibling is like a point of contact to your parents, if that's making sense. And so there is a chain of contact that goes from you to your siblings, who are then represent. So if I would, so your siblings will then represent your parents. And how I actually came to this conclusion is that ancestors would raise let's say they had 5 children. They would raise the elderly children with the highest of strictness, but they would not raise the younger ones. The older ones were then given the responsibility to raise the younger ones. That it was not in my generation, but that was in my father's generation. And what I've seen is that my father, being the eldest in the family, his siblings somehow dressed him like an elder, like a parent. They were not free to just. They would never reprimand him. They would never talk to him anyhow. So, and there's wisdom in that system at the end of the day, because what we find is that when parents raise 5 children, and the eldest ones usually get the strictest upbringing and training, and then the youngest ones get a little bit of spoiling. So to maintain the quality, they would raise the older ones and then transfer the responsibility to the older siblings. And then another aspect which is also very interesting is that in the Tsonga culture, the general word for older brother, older sister is Osi, which is the same word for king. So it's quite interesting. And someone that doesn't understand it might think, why so much emphasis on the respect on the elder sibling? But it's not really about the elder sibling, it's who they represent. Because at the end of the day, if you have even at work, if within a chain of command, if your supervisor tells you what to do, they represent the CEO of the organization at the end of the day. So that's how our family structure is set up, in the sense that when you are facing your elder sibling, they represent you. Their authority comes from your parents, and your parents represent your ancestors, and the ancestors represent God. So in our lives. And then number 9, a compassionate caretaker of fellow humans, care of the household. Number 10, I'm actually like cutting them short. I don't want to make it a book review. A freedom seeker, a nation builder. And then number 12, a steward of the community's natural resources. And then number 12, an explorer and transformer of spaces and civilization, builder personified in African history by the hominids, the first peoples, the Nubians, the Ethiopians, and the builders of civilization of the Western Sudan and the Bantu migrations, the Nilot conquerors, long-distance traders such as the Phoenicians, Somalis, Tuaregs, and the Jula. So what we draw from that, from the 12 characteristics that define a human in the Baluba tradition of the Congo, is the same concept which you find in South Africa. In isiZulu, it's called umuntu, ngabantu, which translated means you are human because of other humans. And as a human, the definition of a human is never singular. I don't want to go too deep into it, but even when you, for example, you look at the ancient Egyptians, in Kemet, the human being was made up of a unification of the Ba, the Ka, and so on and so on. And that a human being by themselves are a community in the definition, and we also find the same concept amongst the Baluba people. So this is an African concept. So why is this important in Pan-Africanism? It's important because it brings us to the question of who is an African, which is the first question that needs to be answered before we even talk about Pan-Africanism. Who is an African? Because people that our politicians that were confused about that presented Pan-Africanism to us as camaraderie, they brought us the likes of Muammar Gaddafi as a Pan-Africanist or an African or a brother. And then when you ask people how he's a Pan-African, everything that they explain that is done, that is supposed to be good for, it clusters around camaraderie. And then I asked the question, what has Muammar Gaddafi done for Africa that the Russians have not done for South Africa? Because the political party that took the forefront in the political liberation in terms of taking the country politically was the African National Congress, and they were able to do that through the liberation army called Umkhonto weSizwe, which means the spear of the nation. That army was trained in Russia, funded by the Russians. The Russians were fully responsible for that. So hey, now if we want to, hence the confusion, the discussion about Muammar Gaddafi being all Pan-African would then confuse it. It would bring in a whole debate, because people, when they say Pan-African, in their mind they're thinking camaraderie. We do not deny the camaraderie contributions of Muammar Gaddafi in for example, the liberation of political liberation of South Africans. He was a comrade of the ANC, but he was not the only comrade. If he's Pan-African, so are the Russians. So, but what groups him with the Russians is that, number one, the Russians are not African, neither is he. He's an Arab. Arabs are not African. They are the invaders in Africa. There's something called the Umayyad conquest, and the Arabs are the ones that actually introduced the Europeans to all these, the concept of slavery. Especially in ancient times, there was no color. There was no race associated with slavery, even though Europeans largely made up the greatest number of the people being enslaved. It was not only the Europeans, it was not a target because they were Europeans. Even the Roman Empire enslaved Europeans more, but it was more of a class thing, because in ancient times, if you came from a community that was not advanced and respected, they would consider your people to be a stock for slaves. So, just as one of the ancient Romans describes the British island, saying they have no literacy skills in literacy or music or anything like that. They're only good for being slaves. Hence, you even see in the same Roman Empire that enslaved a lot of Europeans, which became the downfall for them. And many Africans were in high positions in the Roman Empire. So, but the concept of a slave being identified based on their skin color and hair texture was invented by Arabs. It did not exist before the Umayyad conquest. So now, but our politicians, because of camaraderie, why do our African politicians have this thing with Arabs as brothers? In inverted commas, is we and Arabs have a common enemy, which are the Europeans. And most people, when they talk about, Muammar Gaddafi, even though the discussion is not really about Muammar Gaddafi, he is just a very great example in really setting apart what is Pan-Africanism and what is camaraderie. And when we look at Muammar Gaddafi, he comes from the stock of those that enslaved Africans and still continue. And people can talk about, and no one has actually even told me, not even one thing that is done, but I don't really want to make this discussion about him. I want to get into more the discussion of what is an African. So the Arabs hate Europeans. We don't want the Europeans. The Arabs don't want the Europeans, but for different reasons people don't understand. If I come and invade your house and someone else comes and invade my invasion, the first invader don't like the invader that came and invaded my invasion, and also you as the original owner of the house. So we both don't like him, and so we become comrades. So we get rid of this invader. This is just exactly what the Europeans are. They were invaders of an invasion, because when the Europeans got here, Africa was already invaded by Arabs. That's why even in South Africa, there is no European word a racial slur that has from a European language to refer to black people. It doesn't exist. The K word, kafir or kafir, that's an Arabic word, period. How did the Dutch use it doesn't exist in the Dutch language, the British language, or any European language for that matter, or French. There is no racial slur for us here. But the racial slur came from the Arabs. So the Dutch didn't have to reinvent anything. They found the word there, they just continued using it. The Europeans came here, they found the Arabs had already been capturing Africans and selling and involved in trade, and one brother selling another and giving you some ram so you can, in exchange for your own brother, and some tobacco in exchange for your own brother. That very uneven exchange. So there was a transatlantic slavery, trans-Saharan slavery. Yeah, I just wanted to get the phrase. So they found the system already in existence. The Arabs were already transporting Africans as cargo to Arabia. So the Europeans only didn't introduce anything. They literally introduced nothing to the concept of slavery, except one thing, which was if I take both the Arabs would take African women, rape them, and have a child. So the Europeans didn't invent that. They found that the difference would be the child of the Arab could be called an Arab. Yeah, so we can celebrate them. It's a little bit better because they allowed you to be an Arab. Like people would say things like that. Oh yeah, a slave could still become something in Arabia, which is true. But I don't think there's anything. It doesn't matter. They'll say Bilal was the Prophet's greatest companion. That is the destiny of a man is not to be some dude's companion. Sorry, so that is not something to celebrate. So it's important to understand that why our African leaders are pushing Arabs as brotherhood is because it's got nothing to do with Pan-Africanism. They are saying Pan-Africanism, but they are thinking camaraderie. We and Arabs can be comrades, but yeah, what happens after we get rid of the European is very easy. The Arabs would just take over. There is no way the Arabs would be ruled by Africans. Yeah, and it's very clear who was crowned as the king of Africa by who. Muammar Gaddafi was crowned by a group of African leaders in different countries, like Kenya and I think Ghana, if I'm not mistaken, whatever. But yeah, so it's automatic. That's why Gaddafi was clever. It's like, well, I just need these guys to rally behind me, and then we get rid of the Europeans. When the Europeans are gone, it's easy. Amongst ourselves, these Africans will fight about if which clan is gonna take over. The Yoruba were like, no, we're not gonna be ruled by the Zulus, and the Zulus are like, we're not gonna be ruled by the Nigerians, whatever, all this stuff. But then the Arabs then bring the solution and say, no, guys, relax, we will take charge. Thank you. So North Africa would then, or the rest of Africa would then look like North Africa. If you want to see a world where Arabs and Africans live together without European imperialism, it's there. Just go to Algeria, go to Egypt, and you'll see exactly where your position would be in that kind of state. It's not deep. So what is an African is we are defined by, first of all, the definition of a human as an African. Africans define a human as you are because of other. No. You are a person. No, a person is human because of other humans. So individualism does not. It means under the definition of our ancestors, makes you subhuman somehow, because you are not at the level of what is defined as human. Because you may meet other elements, but there is that one characteristic that doesn't qualify you. You have to meet all 12. And the important one there is where your identity is not individual. Your identity is your people. That is your fundamental identity. And that has been the one thing that has not been touched at all when in this discussion around the continent. Who has come together? Who has told our people that they are one? Yeah, you see, the people that are part of this discussion right now, of course, we understand that, because we unfortunately we don't necessarily represent the population outside, because most of us here understand that we are African not because we are born in Africa, but because Africa was born in us. Yes, we understand that, but the common person on the streets does not understand that. and why, if you really want to see that they don't understand it, take a, I think it's the take someone from there's a province called the Free State in South Africa, and you take this person to Zambia, for example, and when they get to Zambia, and then you introduce them to a group of people called the Balozi or the Barotse, the Lozi people, this person will be completely shocked to hear that these people speaking. Like, yeah, these people are speaking a language I understand. I can understand a lot of the words they speak. People get this culture shock. Africans, when I once spoke to one of the one elder that would have long discussions with, and his company took him to, I think it was Rwanda, the DRC, but yeah, in one of these two countries, I think it was the DRC, and he's like, no, when these people were talking, I man, not like they're speaking Xhosa, because he could pick up the words, certain words, and why people would really be shocked by that is because people don't expect that. They expect people to be, when you leave South Africa and you go to a certain part of the continent, you expect everything to be foreign to you. But if people had the consciousness or the understanding of what it means to be African, they would, when they travel to Zambia, they would expect to find similar things. So your expectations tells you, it reveals your consciousness. So a lot of people do not expect that. So it's always a shock. You travel to Zanzibar and the people are speaking Kiswahili there, and then you hear words like Msidzane, you hear words like Mahari, and you're like, but that's like Sutu, and it's more out of shock, like, how could it be? Because people don't expect Africans from other parts of the world to be like them, because we don't have that. Because before we even talk about let's unite, what are we uniting about? You can't unite over skin color. Yeah, maybe some people can. Most of the time when we talk about uniting over skin color, it's usually over our struggle. Because when people see you, they see a black person, and then they see a threat. So we're gonna unite for that. But that is not what Pan-Africanism. That's more camaraderie. It's more survival, camaraderie, dealing with the enemy. But Pan-Africanism is all about self-determination. It's the question of who are we? Why am I holding hands with you? Because you are my kinfolk. What makes you my kinfolk? Is it because you look like me, have the same nose? Or is it because you have the same values, interests, and principles? So that is what is missing, and answers the question, why are we not uniting if we already know that uniting is what we need? And until Africans can embrace scholarship, because the gap here is, if you really look at the African youth, they are more influenced by politics than by scholarship. And politics presents Pan-Africanism as, it misrepresents it as camaraderie. Scholarship truly defines Pan-Africanism. You can start from the 1800s, when Pan-Africanism was first conceived. You can hear its definition and what the drive behind Pan-Africanism is, and it's always related to culture. Camaraderie has nothing to do with culture. So these two things would tend to be confused, but they're completely different. There's nothing similar about, it just looks similar on the surface, just like a lizard would look like a crocodile, but they are two different species. So the so at the end of the day, a comrade doesn't have to share culture with you. Pan-Africanism requires cultural unity as the foundation of us coming together. And that's why people are confused about, and a lot of people tend to, another, what's this concept that is being mocked in the, from, from the pen, from the, the African scholarly world by the layman people, the Hotep word Hotep, say these people are Hotepas and they think it's a joke, it's funny, they think it's mockery, ignorance, of course. Another term which is mocked is Pan-Africanism. Look through our social media and they're like, yeah, tell these, whenever they see a so-called immigrant, an immigrant in the sense of the Western political system that has clustered us. So if you cross that line that they've put there, then you are called an immigrant in that state. When they see, for example, there's an issue that also needs to be, the final part that I want to address is that we have amongst Africans, you go in as a refugee to another part of Africa, and then you go and disrespect the people there, and you call them lazy, and so on and so on. Big problem in South Africa. Yeah, in the whole African continent, it's South Africa is where the problem stands. People from different parts of the continent come and say, yeah, South Africans are lazy. And then you have same thing in the United States. Like I say, it's almost like they create a system and they copy and then they paste it, because there's a white man's hand behind all this behavior, where you have these. I remember there was a Nigerian American who was running for governor in one of the states, and he said, yeah, he's gonna get rid of Black History Month, and because other people, what about there should be just an American History Month? You know, because they give you a green card if you're gonna cooperate, and people that actually don't realize that these things are not happening by coincidence, they are actually coordinated. There's a video of an Egyptian, a black man from Egypt. When he traveled to United States and got his green card, they specifically gave him instructions on how to behave. They told him never to identify as black. He must tick himself as Arab and so on and so on, and should never associate with African Americans, not participate in their movements or anything. So these things are coordinated. So he cooperated for a little while, and then obviously he had to break the silence and exposed everything and explained that they were forcing him not to identify as black. And he explained, I'm black. Arab is just, to him, he identifies Arab as a culture, not as a race. But then, and went on and on. But I guess he didn't care about that green card anymore. So, so these things are coordinated because, and why I say this, if you look at the relationship between so-called immigrants and locals during back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the Africans who traveled into these countries became a problem in those countries by joining forces with the Africans in that country. So obviously the system, the Europeans decided we need to do some screening. It's dangerous. You have these Haitians coming into the United States and becoming revolutionaries and stuff. I mean, if you, I think it's Kwame Ture, He's one of the leading revolutionaries in black liberation in the United States, and this guy was not an African American. He was, I think, an immigrant, or his parents were immigrants and stuff like that. But they saw that as problematic, so now they want the people that come in to be the ones that are going to cause problems. And you can even see, I've traveled to Pakistan, and Pakistanis are living larger and stuff. They can't do what they can do in their own countries and stuff. So clearly these things are coordinated, and people would then, when we see these people coming in and disrespect and say, like this Nigerian told me one upon a time, one Nigerian equals to 20 South Africans. I looked at the man. I was a kid then, working for myself, but I was still very young, under 30. And the dude didn't even have a pillow. I laughed at him. Like, I feed myself. You're relying on this other man, because Nigerians take care of each other. When you step in, you have nothing. He take care of you, and then in a few months you're up and going. So he said that while he didn't even have a pillow of his own. So this kind of things, then when people see these things, and when Pan-African say Africans need to, there is no foreigner in Africa, Africans are one and all that, and then some fool then disrespects his brothers and sisters, and then they point at the community and say, "But you Pan-Africanists, you guys want no borders, ah? Yeah, look at, is this what you guys are asking for?" So they wanna use that to try and taint and make Pan-Africanism look like it, but it has nothing to do. Pan-Africanism doesn't mean you tolerate nonsense. What happened in ancient Africa, where a kingdom was united, which is a concept of Pan-Africanism, of different Africans in one place. If you broke the code of Ubuntu says respect. You don't disrespect. You don't come as a guest and disrespect your host. What happens to you? They would disband you. They would remove you from the community, because we didn't have prisons. Then you would be alienated, which would be deportation. So people tend to confuse and think Pan-Africanism is some kumbaya, singing together, holding hands. But and people talking about opening borders, it becomes very complicated when people try to mix it with a political system that is happening now. And when people, you have so-called illegal immigrants filling up the country, and a lot of them doing crime, and I know that's a fact. I've been to Zimbabwe a few times, in Bulawayo. I've stayed in, there's a place in Johannesburg called Hillbrow. It's the slums of the earth. It was a very dangerous place at the time. You could just easily see someone get shot broad daylight in front of a whole crowd for a cell phone that does not exist today. and I would see a lot of that. You would have a group of Ndebele people from Zimbabwe being learning that craft of crime and getting a gun and doing that. So when I was in Bulawayo and seeing people walking on the street, I was like, I would ask people, is any scared to be like walking here? Because I thought, seeing the Ndebele people from Zim behaving a certain way in Johannesburg and Hillbrow, and I'll be like, oh, that means back home you can't be walking around like that. You get robbed. And they're like, no, nothing can happen to you here. It's safe and all that. So when I speak like that, someone might then also say, yeah, that's anti-Pan-Africanism. Everything has a balance. Like I said, Ubuntu, in previous discussions, Ubuntu is not a sign of weakness. At the end of the day, Pan-Africanism is not about charity either. It's the coming together of Africans. What you cannot do alone. I mean, it's basically like if we build a house. and you're a carpenter, and you're a bricklayer, and you're this and that, and we come together. It's the coming together of the different expertise. You know, it was not it's not like an NGO type of setup. You know, I know that might not sound very romantic, but ideally, Pan Africanism is really about the way. Now, this is the way. This is my personal vision of how it actually looks. It's about competent Africans meeting with competent Africans and building, just like Freemasonry, you know. So we're not saying then we throw out people that are not very skilled into a hold or anything like that, but it's when competent people come together, they build a community for everybody. You know, that's how societies are built. You don't have a society which is built by everybody. Civil engineers build all the skyscrapers for everybody. Accountants work in those buildings, but they don't know anything about um, structural analysis and surveying and design and analysis when it comes to construction. So yeah, I'd like to end it there. I think it's been very long. I'll now open the mic for comments and questions. Please put up your hand if you would like to say anything, and I'd appreciate it if we can focus more on what is an African really, and because at the end of the day, before people can have Pan-Africanism, first they have to be African, you know, and have to actually know that they're African. But if you don't know you're African, how can you Africans come together at the end of the day, you know? So yeah, let's take it away. Anybody? I don't see any hands. All right. I don't know if people can hear me now. I'm beginning to wonder. If you guys can hear me, please put up your hand.
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Who wants to speak? You, Mr. Villager, sorry. Mr. Villager. Do you want to give us a minute of your wisdom or have a question? Okay, we have a hand from Andrew Tamba. Tamba or Tamba, yeah. Excuse me if I'm not pronouncing it properly. My apologies. You may speak, Mr. Andrew.
Yes, I had a quick question. So I think this is kind of an obvious question, but any recommendations on books? Or, you know, because you reference a lot of things. I wish I would have recorded this, but kind of just a sort of a beginner's journey. What sort of what books would you recommend as far as, you know, what makes one an African?
All right, that's a very good question. Okay, so and on your note about recording, this session is being recorded, so I will put it up on YouTube sometime soon. Yeah. So wow, there are many books that I can recommend, and I'll maybe bring in people to just recommend other books. The first one would definitely be the Muntu was Nzambi, the one I spoke about. It's by Chilemalema Mukenge of the DRC. I think it's from the Congo, and he's basically primarily touching on the culture of the Waluva people, on the concept of human in relation to God, and also touching on the similarities from other cultures such as the Mongol, the Yansi, the Bashi, Hema, Lendu from the Congo, the ancient Egyptians, the Bambara, the Fulani, the Dogon, Mande, Yoruba, Igbos, Gikuyu, and the Zulu, and etc. Yeah. So that is one of the books, and I think it caught me a bit off guard in terms of books on Pan-Africanism, but there's obviously, if in terms of Pan-Africanism, you can also follow the likes of Marcus Garvey, the one who gave us the flag, the red, black, and green, which inspired most of the African flags that you see on different countries. So yeah, that is one of the books. There's many other books you can add. I think the African Origin of Civilization by Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop. That's where he's really touching on cultural unity of Africa, and his recommendation being using Kemet as the classical civilization, and then obviously we can connect to the threat to other African nations or civilizations. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I'm essentially like working on a project where it's sort of like a virtual library of different references, associated with both, Pan Africanism and a lot of the important African and sort of like the important books from each of the countries in this current diaspora. So that's the main reason why I asked. So I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
All right, it's a pleasure. And perhaps on my wall, if I do think of other books, I'll put them up and perhaps tag you on that, and then we can take it from there. Yeah. So yeah, is there anyone else that wants to maybe recommend a book or add a minute of wisdom? Because the ancestor speaks to us as a collective. That's one thing I know about learning as an African. You can learn from a child. A parent can learn from a child. The child can speak, or the ancestors can even speak through a child. So it doesn't have to be anybody that went and studied anything for that matter. So yeah. All right. So if the villager.
Oh, thanks, man, for this space. I mean, I've learned a lot since following you.
Yes.
But I have an issue when it comes to us, the Africans.
Yes.
When we are classified as black people.
Okay.
And then I feel like to be called black is because the Europeans, they just want to justify that, okay, they can be referred as white people.
Oh,
okay. So it's just that I don't know how deep is this thing of understanding that, or we're so comfortable being called black people while we are African.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is just my issue, because I don't feel comfortable to be called a black person, more especially by a person who is from Europe.
Yeah.
And then they want us to call them white. We find that they're just Europeans.
Yes.
I think from now on, actually, I'm just teaching myself not to be called a black person, or if a European person is calling me black, then I just have to refer him back to Europe and say, you are just European.
Yeah. All right. Now that's a very good question and point you've brought up there. I'd just like to now take it back to historically. When we look at before we even go into any literature, when we look at people when you look at skin color, for example, you will never find a white person. It's just impossible. But black skin does exist when you, especially when you go northwards in Africa. So, for example, the Dinka people, when you look at them, those very tall giants, their skin is really black. And but then, so why I'm pointing that aspect out first is Europeans did not know that they were white until they saw black people. But I just want to also take it back to ancient references. So, black in ancient times, when we look at deities, for example, deities were always painted black because basically black was the color of God, of deity. Even the Europeans themselves, even the Pope does not pray to a white Jesus and Mary. They pray to the what they call them Black Madonna and Child. In ancient Egypt, when you were deified, if your life was considered to have been on a representation of God on earth, your color was you were that representation was done by depicting you with a very black color, you know. And then going to literature, the Sumerians were called they called themselves the Sagiga. So this if you according to Europeans, the oldest civilization is Sumerian from Mesopotamia, and the reason they say that is because it's outside of Africa, and they were looking for something older than Egypt so that they can connect Egypt and say Egypt is derived from that civilization which is outside of Africa. But the Sumerians, or the people of Mesopotamia, well, there is actually no, first of all, there's no evidence that Sumeria is older than Kemet. But there is evidence that Tasseti, which is in the Sudan, is older than both Egypt and Sumeria. Archaeological evidence, actually. So, but now when we look at the Sumerians calling them themselves the Sagiga. Sagiga means the black head. So why? And now when Europeans would look at that, if you go on social media, obviously most social media debates is just amateur stuff. The people don't really study, so they just argue, hoping that people don't know their things. So they'll say, no, the black heads represents their hair. Their hair was black. But the crazy thing is everybody in that region's hair is black anyway. But there's a scholar that actually did a whole text on the Sumerians being actually black people. And one of the connections, which is the linguistic connection, is that the Igbo people of Nigeria, they call themselves Isioji. Isioji literally means blackhead. At the same time, it means people. So the word for people in the Igbo language is the word which means blackhead. So long before Europeans came and called us black, the oldest civilizations had a use of the word referring to ourselves as black people. It's only that the Europeans then came to then look at that and polarize themselves against that. So they would, like Europeans, the thing is, how they identify themselves, they used us as a benchmark. You know, they said, okay, well, these guys are black, so we are white. They took, for example, the star of Set, which is the pointed part of the star is at the top, and they in the Masonic order of the Eastern Star, they take the same star and turn it upside down. So it's not that we are black because Europeans called us that. It's that Europeans are white because they found that we are black and we called ourselves that. Even though it was not like an explicit word where they said black people and white people like that, or we are black people. But in the language of what is a human, or how the Igbo call themselves, or the Sumerians call themselves, the Sagiga, it means the blackheads. The Igbo and the Sumerians use the same word to refer themselves as blackhead, and the same word in the Igbo means a human being. Yeah. All right. Okay. I hope that's clear. Let me give a chance to Mr. Pan African himself. We cannot have a discussion about Pan Africanism without having Mr. Pan African speak on the matter. Yeah. Mr. Pan African, the personification of what we are talking about. You may speak, sir.
Hey, my brother, how are you?
Black power, black power. I'm good. How are you, brother?
Black power, my brother.
Yeah.
I'd like to greet the Africans who are listening, man. Although I've been in and out, this is something that I'm busy with. I didn't hear the monologue that you shared. But you will have to add or disagree where you disagree with me in what probably I would have to say, because I want that engagement. Look, I think that the Africans don't basically have to look far for Pan-Africanism, because every other race performs or has done Pan-Africanism in their own races. In fact, I would like to think that what we call racism from the European, and the goal that racism serves for the European, is what we would call Pan-Africanism in what Africans need to be. Because if you look at the European has looked at his survival and his nature and protected what is his and protected his history and distorted it. Although he is a weaker being, but he learned from his weakness and protected it to the fullest. So the way I look at Pan-Africanism, I look at it in a position that says that, firstly, in being an African as well, you basically have to be in touch with your history. For instance, I'll make an example. The reason that there's what you call mummies in Kemet, that those lasted for years and thousands of years. The reason that the European doesn't have a mummy because his skin wouldn't last as long as many of the Africans have been preserved in their tombs as much as they research and find them today. So in short, I would say that Pan-Africanism for me becomes what we look at Europeans and we call racism. Because if you look at what racism serves for them, it serves Pan-Europeans and it makes them become who they are today. And we look at it as something that we must not do. And we say that it's bad basically for them to be racist, but they use what we call racism to become who they are today. And so I look at the word and I say, for instance, if you look at Marcus Garvey and what he did, what he achieved, and how he tried to make it a word, because what he did was that he changed it to something else. He changed it to a call, a war cry, basically, to Africans across the world that said, look, if we call on Pan-Africanism, we mean that by each and every African who lives across the world, there must be a realization that basically they become a nation in and of themselves. And that nation fights against other nations, and it comes together and unifies under the banner that they are Pan-Africanists, so that they look at every other African in the world as one person who is basically African. Now, if you look at the Arabs are a people who basically live in Egypt mostly. I don't know if mostly or somewhere there, but they are the image of what Egypt is today. And now, if you look at them, and even in the Middle East and all of these things, you will look at how they preserved their culture, how they preserved who they pray to, how they preserved their gods, which is basically also a stolen fact from us as what we are. So I look at all of these things and I say that the one thing that is missed from us as Africans today is the fact that we look at other people when they are pan-Arabic or pan-European. And because we don't realize that we need to be like that ourselves, we then think that there is something bad because we so badly in our minds want to integrate so much that we forget that segregation was actually the best part of us. A segregation with ourselves was actually when we ruled the world. Segregation from other races was actually when we conquered most of the things that were happening in the world with the dynasties that we had in Kemet. Now, I'm not saying that we were perfect, as most people will like to say that, no, but when you talk about African history, you must also talk about the bad things. There were bad things, but they were in and of ourselves. We controlled them and we could fix them. But now if you look at integration, now the integration that comes basically with the European, it comes in such a point that the European had to be a unified nation that realizes that it had to conquer a certain group of race that was more powerful than them, which was us. But now, when they act out how their unification, and when they act out that they don't need to mingle with Africans, we then call that racism, and then it hurts us because we think somehow that we need to integrate with them to be something in the world. When it is segregation that has given us past glories, that has given us our kingship and our culture, and the languages that we have in continuation from what we need to be. So I think that from my perspective, and maybe you can comment on this, is that there is basically no such thing as racism or basically superiority. But it lies in the fact that the European then will use that to make sure that he closes his ranks, and he makes sure that because he's a weaker gene, he then protects his lineage, he protects his culture, and he protects everything else that he has, and says, do not mingle with these people. And then when he gains all the power of the world, and then he sits in superiority. And then when he sits in superiority, because he has to maintain that, he blocks every other nation from taking his power by implementing what you call racism, that is based on the superior being that he thinks he is. And so, because we don't look at ourselves as people who should be segregated from the world and from any other race that is there, Arabic, European, and all of these things, we find ourselves blaming racism, or we find ourselves saying that no, racism is bad, when basically we don't realize that racism, although possibly the way they've used it is not how we would use it, but it's the closest thing to achieve a Pan-Africanist movement basically in Africa. Because at the end of the day, if you look at what it has done for them in the preservation of who they are, and the preservation of basically the white man and the European as who he is. Because the European, if he integrates with any other race like us, he would be wiped out as a species in the world today. But what he did was that he looked at his problems and then he researched about his problems. He found out that he was a weaker gene. He found out that he had no color. He found out that if he mixes with an African gives color, and then when the continuation of him mixing with the African, he found out that he would be wiped out in the world. That is why if you look at the Queen of England and the kingdom there in the UK, they had a problem with that son of theirs marrying that black woman, because what they understood was that they knew that if this mixing starts, in a few years, the kingdom will be black. So they understood that. But what we don't understand ourselves is that, for me, Pan-Africanism then becomes what we call racism, because Africans don't have a thing where they say do not mix with other races to protect your race. Africans don't have a thing that says let's protect each other from other races. But we are open to everything, and therefore we can't be Pan-Africanist if we look at it, because we are open to any other kind of segregation. If you look at South Africa, there's Indians, there's Arabs, there's Chinese, and all of these things. And they have an equality of rights and equality of everything that we do. But if you find in their countries, you will find that because they understand that the Chinese man must be the man who lives above everybody else. The European in America must be the one who lives above everyone else. He's not blatant about it, although he's benign. He will eat at you, and then if you find out the policemen what they're doing to African men there in the USA, it will be benign, shooting them in the streets, creating a fear of police and all of these things, and then dragging them to be in a position of powerlessness. But at this point, because our morality somehow tells us that we don't kill, we don't do all of these things that we do, then we lean back and say, no, but we can live together as one. So I will not continue to speak of why the reasons why we are not one in the first place, and the reasons why we don't come from the same person or from the same creator. I will not go there, but I will go to as far as saying that what they are doing and what you call racism, for me, is basically what Pan-Africanism should be within African circles. So I don't know, Musoni, you can come in on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pan-African. Now, that was powerful. I think if I would sum up what you have touched on, you are touching on the first principle of survival, which is self-preservation. And I believe Africans understand that, because when we look at how we relate with each other, we do apply it. It's only when we relate with Europeans and Arabs that we throw it out, because if you marry a wife today and you have children, and she passes on while the children are young, and you marry another wife, you cannot possibly, and then she has children, you cannot possibly expect that she will put the children of the other woman first. She will put her children first. That is just nature. So what you are saying boils down to definitely self-preservation. But I think then when Africans come to dealing with, when they look at Pan-Africanism, a fear comes in of self-preservation of, for example, why, for example, most of the kingdoms had to involve, after negotiation, the ones that did not cooperate, you would have the king conquering or why you'd have the wars where Shaka would have to fight with certain clan chiefs is because when now we talk about Pan-Africanism, the first fear that many Africans would have is, oh, so who's going to lead us? Are we going to let the Balozi people lead us? So, which means we have to be subject to them. And then that fear of of uh, of of being absorbed, and that's why I've even heard on social media people saying we should adopt one African language. We should all speak isiZulu, and then you do that, and you go to the comment section, and you'll see fire from the different groups. And I think it's one of the reasons why Pan-Africanism is misrepresented, because people tend to think it means certain cultures are dissolved into one, but it's not about uniformity. It's about how to use diversity in unity. So yes, what you've said is definitely about self-preservation, and the way you put it out, it's basically common sense. Um, but and now the people out there, the challenge for them is how they identify themselves. Is when you have I've got a video where an old man in East Africa, you can clearly see he's African. His nose is quite elaborately African, and he was being interviewed by an African American man. And you could see the African American interviewer was quite annoyed by him because the man was identifying as Arab, saying he could what's this? He could trace his lineage back to the Prophet Muhammad. It's a common thing you find around East Africa, in these countries which were Arabized. People saying they are all related to Prophet Muhammad, which is obviously mythology. How can all these people be related to him? And it's the same thing that you find obviously among Ethiopian Jews saying they descend from Solomon, whom probably never existed. But the challenges like that, where this man, I think then he asked them, he's like, oh, you're very proud of your Arabic roots. Do you have any African ancestry? And the old man started by laughing, and he said, he has no African ancestry. And we try not to think bad of those who do. And said that all his ancestors are from Arab people. So you could see from there the whole issue of identity, the identity crisis, becomes also a challenge to Pan-Africanism, because you will have I will look at that man and say, there's my brother, we can join forces. And then only to find out he doesn't even identify as African. He says he's an Arab. As it's just like your countries like I think the difference between Haiti and the Dominican Republic is that Haitians are more likely to say they're African, and Dominican Republic, people from the Dominican Republic would say they're not. Even though the one from Haiti may have a portion of European ancestry, and you can see they are so-called mixed, and they would identify as African, and the other one would be super black, and they would say, nah, they're not African. So, yeah, I think at the end of the day, that's one of the things that we've got elements, obviously, called the colonized mind comes into play, yeah, where people cannot see where a man, if you see this man is clearly black in terms of his features, just forget his complexion, just his features, and he says he's not African, he's an Arab. All his ancestors are Arabic. So what would happen, Arabs obviously, when they kidnapped African women and raped them, the children would identify as Arabic, and they would those women would be concubines, and the child would be a bastard. So the child trying to be accepted in the family would denounce or disregard their African mother, their heritage from the African mother, and say they are just Arabic. So those are just examples that I'm putting out. And obviously religion, Africans tend to use religion as identity rather than just religion. Europeans they are first Europeans, then they are Christian. Arabs are first Arabs, and they're Muslim. And if you've traveled enough, you'll be able to see that it's pretty obvious. So yeah, the identity crisis is the big issue in this matter. All right, we're gonna close now. We've been running for 2 hours. We can have a part 2 if you guys would like, but before we close, I'd just like to give the 2 speakers that I've requested perhaps about 5 minutes each to speak, and then we can close so that we can continue with other affairs of life that are facing us. Okay, between Katlego and Temba K, I don't know who requested first, but whoever connects first. Temba, you can speak. I see Katlego is still trying to connect. Okay. Temba K, speak to us. You may speak, sir, or ma'am. Katlego, I see your hand up. You may speak.
What's up, bro?
Hey, what up, man? How you doing?
Man, dude,
Yeah.
I haven't been on your spaces for such a long time, and hello?
Yeah. You can speak. You've got about 5 minutes. Yeah. Take us away.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's a background. So, yeah, man, it's been a while since I entered your spaces. I like your spaces, bro. Like, I don't know, it's been I can't count the years, man, whatever the case may be. Yeah, man, I like your voice. I like your and yeah, that's all I wanted to say, really, man. Yeah, bro, I like your space, man.
All right. Thanks, brother. Thanks. Much love. Thank you. Yeah.
You know, man, bro, I love the way you handle your space, man. You know, you could be the only person speaking on your space, and people will listen for like an hour, you know? And I think it has something to do with your comfortability and the way you settle into yourself. And I love that. You don't see any validation. You don't. I hear my voice in the background, so I'm just gonna end there, bro. But yeah, bro.
All right. Thanks, man. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I guess I'm always comfortable because I always do these in my pajamas. I'm just kidding. All right. Temba, please take us away. You've got 5 minutes. You'll be our last speaker, and then we'll close for today. Temba K. Temba K, okay. Katlego, I see your hand up. You wanna say something again?
No, I don't want to say anything. I just pressed that button by mistake. Sorry.
All right, no problem. Temba K seems to have trouble. I don't know if he has trouble connecting. Your mic is off. Okay. All right. Okay. Then let's have Nono. Sankara Stan. 5 minutes, man. Take us over. Yeah, closing prayer, ma'am.
Interesting conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
And you're interested in hearing what makes one African, right?
Absolutely.
And I was reading a blog, Dr. forgot her name, Atambile, where she was saying that when the colonialists came, they made sure to target language, right? And one of the things they did was esposing, was to change even the greeting. So what we have accustomed to was umolweni, whereas the original one is botani. And here, when you said, you mentioned that Nina, you address a singular person as a plural, right? So, Nina, when we do greet, we can greet a singular person, address them as plural, city botani. In doing so, that is to say, I acknowledge even the spirits that you walk with. So, last definition, you said Congo, an African. Yeah, right. When you say that, you're something else. If you say you are an atheist, but you're not African, I agree with that. And in us being open to seeking our spirituality, then we would acknowledge the need of tracing our ancestry and our identity as descendants of Undu. Yeah? And I agree with Gogomachi when he says that culture does not necessarily have to stay the same, right? If something no longer serves us, then we can lose them. So, and so I would disagree a bit, as much as I'm a traditionalist, right? I'll disagree on the need to say that we must always look at how everything was done back then, right? Especially if we limit our identity to our clans, right? And we're not willing to even identify as descendants of Undu, but we staunchly want to be Zulu and Xhosa, yaba? And then altogether, I think, as I've been exposed to the corporate world, we take for granted how other nations and people were able to incorporate their culture, and they operate within their culture, even in business and just their daily lives, right? So